name, how long you've been on the board, so that those that are new to the board can identify themselves as new members as well.
Yeah, John Barnes, 141 Hillside Road, brand new committee member.
Well,
Bill Bachelor, 2 years, still here.
Natalie Riley, vice chair, actually standing in for George Connolly, who has never missed a meeting, he told me today, which is amazing. So I'm sure he's going to be disappointed, and I'm sure he'll watch this afterwards. And I've been on since 2020.
Lauren Nagel, going on 2 years, I think.
Chris Diaz, and I'm starting my second year. Brian Fornia, first day.
Janet Nealon, 7 minutes.
Thank you to the new members and joining, really valuable. And next piece is public comments. We'll start with anybody in chambers. Anybody has any public comments? None? Anybody on Zoom? Any raising hands? None?
Natalie, I will say that Ken is on.
Oh, Ken is on Zoom, okay. So because Ken is on Zoom, we will roll call votes. If somebody's on Zoom, you have to go through, and you can't just say all those in favor, you have to go through one by one. We don't have a secretary.
No, I could be the secretary.
Okay. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, so for next meeting is the approval of minutes, so I would entertain a motion for approval of minutes.
Motion.
Thank you, second.
Second.
Great. Given the second, we need to approve the minutes on April 28th, the 29th, May 1st, and June 11th. So Lauren, if you could do a roll call.
Forgive me, I don't remember everybody's name. Shannon?
It's just a yay or nay.
Yay.
Yay.
I don't remember his name, I'm sorry. Okay, Chris?
Yeah.
Okay.
Natalie, they weren't at a meeting.
Oh, so
Doesn't
they don't
matter.
need
It
to
doesn't
vote?
matter.
Oh, okay,
Only
great.
people I didn't need to.
Okay. No, this is good stuff to know. So.
Okay, Lauren, yay.
I'm a yay.
Yay.
And then he's, oh, Ken, on Zoom.
Ken, minutes? Yes, no? And once.
So they have one meeting.
Oh, yeah.
You can call him abstained. And for those of you actually that don't know, this is a good note as well. The minutes are now documented via AI, so they are fantastic. Like, they're just really detailed minutes. So if you want to go back and look through some of the really important ones we've had, especially the budget hearings and any of the questions that came out of that, it's good to go back and read through those. So moving on to the budget amendments and the town administrator memo.
So through you, Madam Chair, to the committee and the folks watching at home, sorry for the change up. We had a planning board meeting in here, just for the record, that was canceled tonight. And so we moved down here. We think maybe the representatives from Franklin TV thought everything was canceled. And so we've tried to triage, and I do want to thank Steve Sherlock, who is at every meeting, and we appreciate him trying to patch together the owl camera. So I'm going to go through, Madam Chair, a quick slideshow behind you, about 4 or 5 slides, just to give everybody an FY26 budget update. And then we'll deal with the 5-year fiscal forecast, hopefully as a different agenda item. So just to give everybody an update, no, summer is not over. This is not an indication that we can't step outside and have fun. But the final state budget did get approved by the governor in July. And unfortunately, there was a loss of revenue in state aid of $231,152. Now, that's a lot of money, but it's also a small, very, very tiny percentage of the overall budget. And I want to be very clear about something. This is a loss relative to the June 4th post-override budget that was approved by the council. And I'll go through a couple slides in a second that people will post them online, and people can go through them all in their own leisure at their own time. But I do want to note, because I did get some questions about people being confused, but I did write it in the memo pretty explicitly, the final state budget results in Franklin, losing $231,000 in local aid relative to the final budget approved by the council on June 4th. That's still an overall increase in local aid over FY25 of about $543,000. and change. So we still did see a significant increase in local aid over FY25. The main reasons why local aid went down were because the sending tuition from the from the public schools to the charter school was about another 10 or a dozen students. And also unrestricted general government aid, we had assumed at 2.2%, but it got cut down to 1.1%. I know it says UGA, everyone, the newbies are gonna hear that word all the time. It's just unrestricted general government aid, which is basically just aid that goes to your municipality and you can use it as you want, okay? And just to be clear, the entire Chapter 70 allotment, all local aid, including UGA, essentially goes to the school department. I know I said this every time during every budget meeting we had. Chapter 70 is not just Chapter 70, so the bullet point of per pupil is not the number that we celebrate. We have to bake in the entire formula, which we'll go through in a second. And I do want to point out that the legislature and governor did give themselves a cushion. The governor's budget, House budget, and Senate budget, the final budget that was approved by the legislature and signed by the governor was about $1 billion in less spending than what had been previously expected during their budget debates. And a big part of that, I mean, it's been in the news, this isn't a secret, but obviously the federal cuts that are looming from the federal government likely precipitated that. And I do think the legislature is doing a wise thing. That is spending that could come back if revenues and everything down, kind of somehow plateaus. But they are expecting, I think, a significant amount of revenue loss from all of the federal budget cuts. Happy to answer any questions that folks have on that later. It is also important, very important for Franklin to point out that outside Section 3 of the final state budget did include an outside section that mandated the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education conduct what's called a Chapter 70 report, which will likely pave the way for it will likely be a commission that will be set up to essentially review and make any changes to the Chapter 70 formulas. The last time that happened was in 2006. And as many of you know, I was fortunate enough to be a part of that. I worked for the state senator for many years that was the Education Committee chairman. And I can tell you that it is not an easy exercise. Why is this important to folks? The town, for the new folks, don't worry about this yet, but you will hear this term all the time. Town of Franklin is a hold harmless community, which basically means because of the declining enrollment over the last 20 years being so steep, essentially there was a hold harmless provision that...
On Zoom, there's no audio, so we have to
Start over?
set the audio in.
Okay.
In your Zoom, so just stop sharing.
Someone says just hear a tiny bit, but quiet spot.
Just stop sharing. I thought you were. No, stop sharing. Oh, I see. As soon as you gave us. And then okay, now within your screen, you get audio, and then you need to select the owl. Echo out.
How's that?
Yeah, so it's
Testing audio. Can anybody confirm they can hear audio?
I could not.
Previously, we just made a change.
She's checking.
She's checking.
it shows you as muted.
I think if I unmute
That's the-
still,
Zoom, but we connected to this through the owl, so.
All right.
No.
is this,
There we go.
what? Yep,
Now we can.
you can hear it now.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay, great.
All set. Thank you.
Yep,
Are things running through the microphone?
yes.
Okay, so we don't have to scream.
I don't, oh, gosh. Just trying to share it again.
And just while just speak normally, but try not to whisper, because the camera, the owl, is the audio as well as the video for anybody up on Zoom.
Okay.
Great.
Perfect.
You're back.
Okay. Of course. Okay, perfect. And so as I was saying, just for the folks that didn't catch that last segment, essentially due to the sending tuition of the charter school from the public to the charter school, there was a loss in local aid of $231,000. There was also some other parts of the formula that were trimmed just a tiny bit. We did still see an increase of almost $543,000 over FY25. But as I mentioned a moment ago, the $231,000 loss is relative to the vote of the budget that was approved by the town council on June 4th, where the Senate and House numbers altogether were much higher, and they were different. And so ultimately, we have to patch the budget gap of $231,000 is what we're now in deficit. There is a outside section that was in the budget that everybody in Franklin should pay attention to. There's a report due in a year from the state agency that oversees education. We've talked about hold harmless in this community for the entire 10 years I've been here, and I know my predecessor talked about it many years before that. This has been a dynamic that has occurred since about 2008, 2009 due to the declining enrollment. And what hold harmless is it's a state law that protects communities that see a significant amount of declining enrollment over a period of time and holds them harmless for that demographic switch so that they don't see a steep loss in local aid. However, with the budget cuts likely coming from the federal down to the state, there's going to be a lot of federal pressures put on the state. And so this community needs to be very well aware that by the end of this time next year, there'll be likely a report out by the state recommending changes to Chapter 70. That could affect Franklin in a very seismic way. Now, to patch the budget gap that we have here, I've got two models to present. And what I tried to do is keep them as simple and concise as possible. So the first model is Model A, which would be a 50-50 split of cuts. Essentially, 50% of the cut would go to the school department, 50% of the cut would be to the town. There is a resolution in your packet that outlines these changes. This does not have to be the choice, but given the fact that it's education aid that's mostly reshuffling here, we're just trying to say for ease for the community that you could do a 50-50 split or any other proportion. I will note that most of the boards and committees that are recommended on here, from the town's perspective, most of these have never seen a haircut over the last couple of years in the budget, so we're just giving them a small trim so that we try not to have further cuts into all the other departments that have already taken a huge amount of cuts over the last couple of years. I will note that on here, and this will be the same for the next one, when we do the budget in May and June, we do projections based on healthcare. But by the time you get to the end of the summer, you have actuals. People have gone through open enrollment. So much like if this model was chosen, I suspect, and you can ask the schools later, but I suspect when they look at their actuals from healthcare, they may be able to plug their gap up there with that just like we did. So we're anticipating a $75,000 savings based on the actual enrollment of folks that have enrolled in our healthcare program here in New York. And just so we're clear, this model here does not restore any service. It's just 50% right down the middle, each side takes a 50% haircut. Model B, based on the feedback I've heard, I don't know if any of you got away this summer, but I certainly heard from many residents that are very disappointed in a significant amount of the cuts that have happened. I think many of you have probably heard as well. So Model B, we would propose to restore the ambulance, and this would allow for no additional cuts to the school. So if you look up on the right-hand column here, where the pointer is, basically what I did is based on a lot of the feedback I've heard and the concerns around the ambulance loss, we went in after looking at healthcare and said we could probably still trim some of those boards and committees just a little bit. Some of them actually do make sense because now the Board of Appeals can do their ads, online, for example. But if everybody takes a small trim and the benefits, you then make $96,000 worth of cuts on the town side only. And as a result, that replenishes the two paramedics down here at about 90 grand. And I walk right down through this entire, you can read line item by line item, and then add in benefits for the two paramedic restoration, and the paramedics would be restored on January 1st of 26, which is a half a year. So then you restore about 114,000 in services, the loss in state aid, and then you add in about $250,000 in projected ambulance revenue receipts. I know for all of you that were on the finance committee all year, you've heard about this, but for the new folks, basically with the loss of the ambulance also comes the ability to bill those services to those healthcare companies. And so the fire chief estimated that we would lose about $500,000 a year in revenue, which we'll see later, by the way, on ambulance receipt slides. And so by restoring those paramedics, you can restore the third ambulance and then restore 6 months worth of billable receipts. It's very important for people to know if a mutual aid call comes in from another town, that community gets the revenue. So we heard a lot of feedback. I heard a lot of feedback. I know a lot of people behind me and maybe many of you, that this was poor fiscal management. Why would we do this to lose the revenue? We heard many, many arguments about it. I also think there are an extraordinary amount of people that are very concerned about the loss of the ambulance in particular. So we chose the ambulance here because that was certainly, from what I heard, the number one concern across the community among many different demographics. And also by doing that, you can restore some revenue generation, which would be able to allow us to not have to make any other further reductions to any other departments, including the school. So this model here has no reductions to Franklin Public Schools. What was appropriated to FPS on June 4th is still the number that they would have. So that's it in a nutshell. I'm not going to go through all these slides. There's a lot of numbers. But I put this on here, and Evan did a great job of it, our budget director, to showcase, essentially, if you look at the top, FY25 is in this column, FY26 governor's budget, FY26 House budget, Senate budget, conference committee budget, final state budget. So people can look through the next 3 slides. I'm going to walk through quickly. This slide right here is the revenue portion of Chapter 7. So this is the line up here that everybody loves. They love the good news, right? So if you look at FY25, we received $29.7 million in Chapter 70 money. And if you look at this over here, it appears that $30.46 million, we've made about $800,000 on Chapter 70. However, I cannot emphasize this enough because I have heard so many confusing statements from people in the community about this. Everybody up here on Chapter 70 celebrates the per pupil increase. In particular this year, we talked about it during budget hearings, the governor and legislature went up to $150 per pupil. That was a long time goal for the MMA, Superintendent's Association, MTA, a whole variety of stakeholders. However, they trimmed charter school reimbursements right here. And then on the next slide, we'll see the charter school sending tuition as well as school choice. So I just want to make sure everybody looks at the places that are in orange on here. This is a comprehensive formula. We cannot just celebrate and focus on only the good. We also have to focus on the other numbers. So the second slide up here is the estimated assessments and charges. Again, all of this is in state law. There's no local jurisdiction on these matters. There's a county formula. There's mosquito control, air pollution. I don't even know what that is, by the way. MAPC, RMV, there's the GATRA service. Okay, these are all deductions off your local aid. These are also revenue sources in another place in local aid. But the point I really want to drive down is the tuition assessments down the bottom. If you look from FY25 across the board, and if you saw a trend over many years, you'll notice there was $6.123 million in charter schools sending tuition. For those who are new, when a child from your community enrolls in the charter school, the per pupil cost comes from your public school district and goes to the charter school. That was passed as part of education reform in 1993 and has not been changed in 32 years. This is probably one of those issues that will be evaluated as part of that Chapter 70 commission that I was mentioning. This is definitely, and I know Amy and I worked in the legislature for a long time, as Amy knows too, this is one of the most challenging issues lawmakers have. Okay, this is not new. It has been very challenging for the legislature for many years, and that's why the formula really hasn't changed. But This is the main reason. And you also have on here school choice sending tuition. So there's a percentage of school choice that has the same impact. If somebody goes to another district from this community, there's a percentage of those funds that go. So when you look at the number before of 30.4 million, and then you see on this slide, the town of Franklin is sending, basically 6.7, 6.8 million to the charter school and other districts. And those are now assessed against your Chapter 70 number. So that's why we can't, say, wow, look at all the $150 per pupil we received, we got all this money, because then you get charged assessments on the back end for sending out. So and then on the third slide, you can see, this is the summary. Estimated receipts, estimated charges, net state aid, and you see here, the net state aid in FY25 was 26.7 million. And then over here, the net state aid is 27.3 million. So after you take into consideration all of those accounts, you come away with the net at the end, and those are the numbers that we end up plugging into the budget every year. Every city or town plugs this into their budget every year. That's why we wait for Governor Healy's budget every year at the end of January with bated breath, because when the governor puts out their first budget numbers in January, that's what every city or town uses as their benchmark for their budget for the upcoming fiscal year. So I know those are a lot of numbers. These will be online later. I know people will pour through them, but I thought it would be helpful to show the chronological order of the different numbers and how they've shaped throughout the budget process for the legislature. So I'll pause there, Madam Chair, answer any questions, and the action tonight that's requested out of the Finance Committee is to essentially make a recommendation to the Town Council for Model A or Model B, and they'll be voting and taking this up on Wednesday night. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a few questions, but I'm happy to entertain others before I jump in.
I have one question, just a point of clarification, go back to the prior slide. You said the new tuition, the tuition assessment being a deficit, getting counted against the Chapter 70 funds. Did you say that's new? That's not how they did that?
It's
Okay,
been that way.
That's how it's always been.
It's
Okay, it's
been
the
like
way
that
you
for
said it
32
made me
years.
think they had just made that change.
No.
Just wanting to clarify.
Oh.
So my question, because we didn't have this presentation, right? We just had the memo.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the first questions I had on the memo was, and I'm not on Facebook, so I don't know the central messages, or I don't get spoken to about them, but I couldn't understand, the central message after the override failure was to cut the services the town schools said would likely be cut.
Yeah.
So was there a difference between what was communicated was gonna get cut and what was actually cut?
Nope. The priority that I think the council and all of us heard from many advocates was when the override, even before the override failure, the central theme was you have to do what you said you were going to do. So the cuts that were on that list that we presented throughout the community on the listening tour, we said we were going to make them. I'm being sensitive and empathetic to the fact that a lot of those cuts then were very unpopular among different demographics throughout the town. And I presented Model A because if the Finance Committee or the Council do not want to restore an ambulance, then they can take another option and they could cut each budget 50%, right? Meaning, I don't want, and I hope this doesn't happen because an ambulance is obviously in a lot of cases life or death. But I'm sensitive to the fact that the community made a decision. There was a lot of advocacy to say, don't restore any of the cuts. But when I'm looking at the numbers and I'm looking at the revenue loss and I'm looking at the concerns in the community about the ambulance, I'm saying, well, we could do a 50-50 cut, but that's not going to help the schools out because they already have their budget set for the year and they got school starting in 3 or 4 weeks. And we all know, and we've heard from them before too, rightfully so, that once they have a budget in June, they kind of are planning out, and it's hard to hire somebody back or make a cut, right before the school starts or in the middle of the year. So our team was just trying to be creative on how to withstand as many more cuts to anybody, but also try to gain that revenue back that may be going to other towns. So that's why the two options were there, and I recognize that some people in the community may not be happy that there may be a model here to restore one of the services that was cut a few months ago.
Got it, okay. On that same note, I guess, if the ambulance makes money net, why was it cut in the first place?
Because we told folks we did what people wanted, you know.
What was
There's a value, I think, in, well, there's a lot of opinions on this, right? I mean, I could go many different directions, but I think there was a very loud priority that people didn't feel like the cuts were going to happen, or that there wasn't trust, or that there wasn't these issues. And so we literally did just about exactly what we said we were going to do. 2 police officers, 2 paramedics, $2 million in school cuts, the library, seniors, everybody took a cut, and we did it right as we did on the slide, all winter long. So I think, whether it was good financial sense or not, I don't know was the priority 2 months ago, and that's okay because these things evolve, But I think since that's happened, and look, I've heard complaints about every cut that was made on every department, so it's not like that's. But some of those other cuts don't come with a revenue like this. Some of those other cuts aren't life or death, and I think there's a lot of concern from a lot of people that we did what we said we were going to do. Some people didn't believe that. We did it, and now there's a little bit of buyer's remorse maybe from some people that maybe we shouldn't have done that. And there's been certainly some commentary that why would we cut a service where we're bringing in revenue? Of course, you'll see later in the 5-year fiscal forecast, I could also make the argument that a lot of people behind me, including my office, raise a lot of revenue, and we shouldn't be cutting those services either. But the department has outlined this very clearly in December in a letter to everybody. So that's kind of it in a nutshell.
Got it. No, and I get it, because I think, probably what I think of before too is where there's been a gap and then it's been fixed with some other savings, but maybe it's a little more hidden. People don't see it and they're like, oh, they found it.
Right.
So this was a way to avoid that. Totally get it.
Can I ask a question? Just on that note, if you go back 2 slides to where you outlined the, and you were making some cuts to the committees, there was one, the cultural grants. That strikes me as reducing funding to get grant money. That seems counterintuitive as well, so I was just curious. I know it's only $5,000. I just wanted to make sure we're not getting stuck in another place where we're cutting money that will maybe potentially bring in more than the $5,000. If it's grant.
Awesome question. These, by the way, for the newbies, these are the great questions that we love to hear from everybody. So that's a really good question. So the grants are not actually, those are local, that's local money that goes to actually artists and artisans in town here.
Okay.
So the state has a cultural council formula that's not here,
Okay.
and they give us about $18,000 a year through the state budget.
Okay.
And that's just a formula grant, and we get that. Over the years, we've tried to match that, and then the last several years, we went a little bit higher than that.
Okay.
And so this brings us back to matching what the state gives us, so
Okay.
this will not reduce any additional revenue.
Got it, okay, I assumed, I interpreted that differently.
That's why that was a great
Grants,
question, because now we can get out
okay.
the correct info.
And I also got on the same
Mhm.
thread of thinking, because I read this and it was weird. I think I totally get the sticking to what we said. Like, I understand the concept of if we said we're gonna cut something, we should cut it when the vote didn't go. Right, that makes sense. But I think even before that, we probably had something here that didn't make sense, right? We were cutting something that was net profitable. So if I'm understanding your numbers, that's 140K we just threw away, basically. We're paying 90, we get 250 back.
Yep.
We just said we don't want 140K of free money.
Right.
Is there other things that you're aware of, or that I guess anyone is aware of, that we cut at that time that have that same true cost to receipts ratio, not sort of a soft, maybe A leads to B if we're lucky, but a hard, we know from past years receipts are better, right? Revenue goes up by spending whatever it is, that 50K or that 90K. Are there other things like that were cut?
So the last 2 years of municipal cuts, I'd have to go back and look at every little, not every I and T, but what we've tried to prioritize are, when we had to make cuts, we tried to prioritize things that were not going to get us into regulatory trouble with the state government or federal government. Like conservation, for example, we can't just cut the conservation department. We tried to prioritize positions or cuts that had no impact on revenue generation. I can't think of any off the top of my head where we were going to lose a significant amount of revenue from any other cuts. The ambulance was probably the first one that I can think of over the last few years. Now on the school side, there may be a different case in terms of how fees get collected for like athletics and stuff like that. But as you probably know, they had to increase fees for a lot of the athletics to make the budget solvent this year. So I'm guessing that they're not losing any positions that would bring in revenue either, but you could ask them. But I can't think of any off the top of my head because we've been trying to prioritize, obviously, cuts. And when we get to the end of the fiscal forecast presentation, I've got a whole bunch of slides on revenue generation that will hopefully also kind of connect the dots for you.
Is there any feasibility of bringing this back sooner than the first of the year?
Bringing back the ambulance? Well, it'll go through the council tomorrow night, on Wednesday night. We'll have to post the jobs, so we'll post those by next week, have them usually open for about 4 weeks, interviews. We're also in the middle of the process of hiring a new fire chief. It's possible, but I'm gonna have to wait and see how the fire department budget matriculates out over the next few months. Somebody might be out, I might be able to save a little bit of money in between and maybe hire them in December, something like that. But probably not any earlier.
Bring in more money though, right? Like the sooner you hire them, the more you're effectively bringing in.
That's right.
Okay. So your priority would be to hire them as soon as you
As soon as I can fiscally responsibly do it, and absolutely to take in that revenue. Absolutely, 100%. Yeah.
Thanks. Sorry.
No, not at all. Good question, yeah, it was on topic. And I just saw note all the collective bargaining agreements for 27 and 28, so we're all final. I know that's always kind of a closed door subject, so we're finalized, we're good.
All but one,
Yeah, okay.
but we're dealing with that hopefully by the end of the month or early September. But all the other ones are done, and those, when we get to the final fiscal forecast, all of those numbers have been input into the budget.
Fantastic.
So what's reflected on the 5-year forecast reflects the CBS.
And I know there's always a placeholder. I'm assuming otherwise you would have called it out. There was no surprises.
No.
Okay, great. And then I just wanted to call out the consolidation of the IT department, and there was another and the health benefits. Is that
Well,
before
those
your
are,
head?
yeah, that's the 5-year
Okay.
forecast piece.
Okay, gotcha.
Well,
So I'll
I'll
hold
go
on.
through that in a minute. Yeah.
Okay.
I just want to make sure the committee focuses on like finalizing a recommendation to the council, on
So.
Model A and B, and then we'll get to the
Oh,
5-year.
gotcha, okay, because that was sorry, I missed it, that was the
Mhm.
piece. Okay. I didn't have any more questions on that then.
Yeah.
So the restoring of these two positions, because obviously some of us weren't here with these discussions. Does this mean that these two people were let go?
They weren't, they were not let go, the vacancies weren't filled.
Okay, so people had left previously.
That's right.
And they were not
That's right.
filled. So the reduction that we took was just not filling two positions
That's
that
right.
weren't filled already.
That's correct.
So was that ambulance then not in?
It was in full service, now it's in partial service, but it'll return to the full service. And if you want the fire chief to come up and talk to you, more than,
I don't want
he's
to.
only got a couple months left, I mean, he's more than happy to take one more trip to the mic and,
Yeah.
maybe he can get everybody on the same page with just the new folks. I don't know if he's. Do you want to just go through those?
Yeah.
Give you a little.
Yeah. So, to Madam Chair, so to restore,
Yep, go ahead.
so just to be clear, when we say restore the third ambulance, we're talking about 40 hours per week. It's not 24/7, 365. It's 40 hours a week, business hours. That's what we did. We actually started in October of '23, and we did it for all of calendar year '24. We put the third truck in service during impact, we call it impact time, during business hours from 7 to 5. So when we bring these, if this happens, option B, that brings it back to 40 hours. On July 1st, we did put it out of service. However, in the interim, we've had about 8 shifts from July 1st until today, where we had 13 or 14 personnel on the shift. 14 are assigned to the shift. If we have a full complement of employees come to work, it'd be irresponsible for me not to put the third ambulance in service. So that's the reason between July 1st and now,
We have had 8, 10-hour shifts where they were full because we had the manpower. But normally, that's not the norm, and as the season goes on, won't be the case. So the truck is basically out of service for the most part. Since July 1st till now, there's been about 30 mutual aid calls into town, and there's been 3 transports of the A3, the 30 ambulance did do since July 1st with those 9 or 10 calls. So it's technically out of service, but if you have the manpower, it's the right thing to do to put it in service. We have 13 or 14, that's why it's been very limited in services.
This will be back full time.
So if this is approved, it would be 40 hours a week, definitely 40 hours a week during impact time would be in service. But we're restoring those 2 personnel that we're talking about tonight.
So those, through the chair.
Yeah.
Through the chair.
That's right.
So those 2 people that you'd be hiring on, we'd be hiring them full-time so that there wouldn't be the chance of you not having a full boat, as it were.
That's correct for those 40 hours, that's correct. That would give us the 40 hours guaranteed per week that 30 ambulances would be in service, absolutely. That's what those 2 will do.
Through the chair, thank you.
I hope it makes sense.
You only have, I just have to like, say the last question.
Yeah.
Any other questions on this?
Can I ask one, just as a follow-up? So what if we wanted to do more than 40 hours? Is there any value to it being more than 40 hours? Is that an additional head? And does that bring in the equal amounts of revenue?
No, it would bring in more, if we had it full-time, it would bring in more revenue. Obviously, it'd be in service on nights and weekends, so that'd be more calls that we wouldn't have to bring in. But we just thought our strategy for the last couple of years was to be fiscally responsible and keep up with the numbers. We think right now, this part-time ambulance, at least for the next fiscal year coming in now, that's doable. It's going to be a conversation that this town is going to have in the near future. But we think it's probably the most fiscally responsible that we can do FY26 with the 40 hours part-time right now. But it will be a conversation in the future for sure, as the numbers are going up, because they continuously go up. But if we had it 24/7, that's even less mutual aid we would bring in. We brought in 295 mutual aid calls in calendar year 24 with a 30 ambulance in service part-time. That's still a lot. And we anticipate, now that we went backwards in July, that number's gonna climb into the 300 or 400s. So we kind of went in reverse July, and that's why this is really important right now. That's why it's important.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any more questions on you?
Yeah, just through the chair. So I appreciate we have 2 models. Model A, it's school, school and town. Model B is just town, but bring back the paramedics. I think, in particular, Model B is interesting and attractive because of the fact that there's a revenue generation opportunity there. I also think it's being fiscally responsible to, go for the 40 hours instead of aiming for more right now, even though there might be upside there. But it's something we just want to think about and talk about as we continue forward instead of doing that all the way there. But to think about Model A, that's a 50/50, that's a reduction, that's additional reductions to the school and to the town. And it's difficult because it feels like for much of the last several years, we've been having that argument of where should reductions happen? Should it be the school? Should it be the town? It feels like we got to a place where we're somewhat balanced. It's difficult, that said, it's difficult to say that additional cuts to the school make sense given how hard they've been hit over the past 5 years. And that's not to say that the town hasn't felt it as well. I guess my point is, I appreciate you giving us options for proposals, but I don't see how Model A is a realistic one. Model B, I don't think is unattractive, but I'm curious if there should be a Model C or if there are other things that we're thinking about. And maybe the question is, perhaps there are other models that you considered but just aren't here yet. Curious what your thinking has been on that.
Well, I tried to keep it simple and concise. I mean, the committee can ultimately recommend any model you even want to make up, right? I mean, that's within your charter. I mean, your main responsibility of making recommendations to the town council on fiscal matters. It's hard to say there's a C. I mean, of course, there's a C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, right? I mean, you could carve up and cut out. I think where we're going, trimming anything else is you're digging yourself deeper into the pit of what's already been made, right? Whether it's schools or town, right? We're in the bone already. So I tried keeping it as concise, but I also wanted to present an option that was respectful of what the voters said. Even if it was a 93 vote loss, right? 1% loss 2 years in a row is not an overwhelming mandate. But at the same time, there were a lot of passionate pleas from advocates saying we had to do what we said we were going to do. So, I'm always conscientious of the fact that if you're restoring an ambulance, right, then what's the next ask, and then the next ask. And all summer long, people have been asking about how to restore their little particular thing here or there, and we've kind of just said we were doing what we were doing. I think this one's only rare because it's a life and death scenario for the ambulance, but also the revenue piece. Some of the people that were critical of the override as well were also critical of this decision to cut the ambulance. So it's like, you damned if you do, damned if you don't. So I think this was like the kind of two paths of least resistance. And I was able to look at some of the board and committees and say, well, if they do a fair haircut on their budgets too, geez, we can get through, And I think restoring the ambulance in perpetuity in the future, I know is something that's going to not just provide the revenue, but provide that feeling of safe and sound, which we saw in the citizen satisfaction survey too. Our fire department is about a 94-96% approval rating in town, and I think people certainly value public safety at a very elite level. If anybody had any of the recommendations, the finance committee can certainly make those suggestions.
Can I, I'm sorry.
Sorry, the
Yeah.
one follow-up I have to that, and if I'm jumping ahead too far, you can pull me back, we can discuss it later. My other concern is, and I think Model B makes sense, if we can bring back the part. I'm thinking about, how I am, I tend to think about, okay, what is the future gonna look like?
Okay.
I know we've got a 5-year forecast, I know we're looking, my concern, given that inflation isn't going away, the cost of things continue to increase, our ability to pay for what we have today is not getting better. I would love to not see the ambulance, on the cut list next year or the year after, or the year after that. But part of me is wondering, what is going to be on that list? Should we be planning for that? Should we be not adding because we're gonna have to potentially cut it in 2 years?
Well, that's a fantastic transition into the 5-year forecast, which is probably the best 5-year forecast too. That's why I recommended Natalie and George to do a separate agenda item and a separate presentation, because I think, as you'll see in my summary, this to me is the last you'll see of a 5-year forecast, probably until January, until the governor comes out with their budget, right? Because we've got good numbers in that. I don't know. I think this is about community value as well. It's hard to have an ambulance and then cut it and then sleep at night. There's also, I know, cuts that everybody else feels about police, schools, even those, who use the library on a regular basis, senior center, there's a nurse involved in that, it seems like there's at least a galvanizing around. And I think the revenue, Bellingham and Rentham, and it seems odd that I think that piece of it probably folds a little bit into it too. That they're basically we're showing up at they're taking the revenue that we would normally collect here if we had that apparatus in service. So it's tough. I can't pretend that I have the answer on it. That's kind of why I gave a couple options for the committee to think about in case. Because I do agree, Ken, I think you're highlighting the different feelings from different people in the community and where some of the division is on how they see this, right? But you'll see on the next slide the budget deficits for the next 5 years, or in a minute, and you'll see all the other revenue numbers that we have. And I think, I think my guess too is with the call volume, and this is the sensitivity sometimes that are on local receipts. Is the staff, the firefight, our firefighters are the ones in the ambulance going to the calls, dealing with horrible situations, some of which you all are familiar with. Even in the last 2 months in Franklin, there's been some horrible accidents that have had to have that happen. And I think, from their standpoint, I'm sure they'd like to know that that revenue that keeps going up and up and up because of the call volume is also being reinvested in that department and keeping that department whole. So I think in the future, I can at least speak for myself as the person who presents the budget. I won't be looking at any future cuts to the fire department, at least from my standpoint. So it would have to be the council, the finance committee, or others in the community that fight against that. Because I think that this is a service that we worked really hard to get to where it is. And, I think it's wearing on people that it's not to where it was 4 months ago.
So I'd like to make one more comment about option B. It's really only $21,000 worth of cuts if you boil it down, because there's revenue generating and then there's $75,000 that you've already identified as likely savings from people not electing benefits. So that was going to be savings you realized anyways. So it's not even really a cut. The rest is just 21. That not just because I want to be sensitive to all the commissions and the councils, but it's $21,000. So we took a $231,000 impact, and really it's only $21,000 worth of cuts with option B. I just want to highlight that is good fiscal math, and it's good for the community. So, well, not the cuts to, I don't want anyone getting mad at me about the committee cuts, but the fact that we were, option B was able to mitigate the impact, I think, is something we should think about.
So can I just add to that? I mean, I think we're all doing the same math here, and we all can. I ballpark 25, you were a little more specific. But I would maybe ask, and I know I see we've got our schools represented here, like, don't mean to put you on the spot, but this benefit line item, like, are you expecting you're gonna have something similar? Well, because if that's 21,000, then I don't know that any of this makes sense other than that line item, your line item, and the restoration, right? Maybe that's option C. Sorry to budget on the fly, but.
Oh, should be.
Budget on the fly. It's a new series. Good evening. Should be a superintendent of schools. So I don't want to jump ahead to your 5-year forecast, but I'll just speak as I've been listening. We've been talking. We meet bi-weekly to discuss these topics that come up. My sense and my feeling is, as we've said through the FY26 budget process, as we move through this, the schools make up 54%. You all heard that and seen that outlined. It represents 54% of the budget. So when I looked at when we look at this information, just the reorganization alone that we did achieved a $3.1 million reduction through that. We reduced 29 positions in the winter, which you may recall. And then when the override failed, we were responsible for $2.1 million, which was 54% of the shortfall. That was approximately 12 positions. Some that were unfilled that we did not fill, similarly to the conversation you had earlier, and then other line items in which we made adjustments. We're now faced, we just learned, in addition to this, from a school perspective, we have additional unanticipated special ed costs that were not budgeted that are after the budget was finalized, have come through. That happened in July. In addition to that, you were legally mandated to provide those particular services that will happen. So given these circumstances, just from a school perspective, I'm in full support of option B and plan B as it's outlined, because we cannot sustain the additional cut of $115,000, particularly with the timing, as Jamie already mentioned, as school is starting very shortly. The teachers come before the Labor Day break. We needed time because of all the moves that have been happening throughout the summer, and the students will come back to us after Labor Day. But given the timing, I don't know where I would reduce further the $115,000. In addition, to me, there's a lot of feelings and a lot of emotions around all of these topics, and I recognize that we field many of those conversations and concerns from the community. In this particular case, in this particular moment, to me, if we were to truly look at this and try to step out of the emotions, and I'm someone who's been living and had to make the really tough decisions on my end, just like other department heads have around reductions and reduce the school budget and go through the reorganization, I still sit here today to say that if I was to remove all the emotion and the noise, and you told me that there was a solution where I would not have to sustain a cut this year, and it would bring back additional positions and generate revenue from just a logic standpoint, and I'm not looking to I want to use the same sensitivity you mentioned, but from a logical standpoint, to me, this seems like at this moment in time, with the information we have, this was a logical solution. And then I do appreciate the idea of having not 17 models, because I think that just gets mired in the weeds, and then we don't have answers or decisions made by the authoritative bodies to continue to move forward with our work in a timely fashion that helps us. So with that said, I will just, I'll end with that.
So that's helpful, and I guess like I'm understanding of your special ed increase.
Yeah.
But kind of back to the question, like, are you going to have reduction in what you expected for your open enrollment costs?
My open enrollment costs, are you talking about?
Like specifically,
Yeah.
line
Jonna, do you know
9-10?
if, are you
Okay.
seeing an increase or a decrease for open enrollment, after open enrollment in healthcare? Okay.
Especially since we've been hiring, our hiring seasons now, so when we fill positions, people get hired that are in the queue. I think we have 5 teaching positions left due to changes of people leaving or coming or retiring. So
They usually are able to answer that at a greater specificity after October 1st, because once you get to September 30th by teacher contracts and dynamics, that's really more their cutoff on healthcare. So they'll probably still have some people sign up, or people that take a job in another district they may release. So we'll ask Jonna.
So just unknown at this time.
I know, but Jonna, you couldn't hear her, but she'll get back to us later in the fall, I think, what she was saying in October, once the full staff is set, and we can report back on that.
we definitely have a better idea handled by the first day of school, because you kind of know who but they do have a window to elect.
And just back to the other thread that I was asking about before, are there any positions or situations where you made a cut that you foresee you could actually generate revenue by not making that, like by avoiding that cut? For
So-
example, like renting out fields to other teams or things like that we now can't do because you don't have the staff. It's something that is net positive, right?
So
Where-
on a smaller level, not comparable to the fire department.
Sure.
But for example, with the theater program, when you have gate receipts and people pay to come watch a theater show, you collect those gate receipts. That gets collected in a revolving account and then gets redistributed for the purposes of a theater program. When you offer less after-school productions, you don't collect the same amount of gate receipts. So that's just like a small example. But with regard to a human being or a staff employee that we would have reduced, that would have been in a situation similar to this. I can't think of one off the top of my head now. I was actually sitting there trying to think of that when you asked the question.
Sure.
Just picture that, theater, music, you start tying it together, but those are areas. Clubs, we have collected, we've increased the fees. We're trying to get our club participation increase, which I'm hopeful this year, knock on wood, we'll continue to see that happen. And then the last piece I would mention, you mentioned athletic fees. We're anticipating having, our full athletic program running. There are increased fees, I'm paying them as a parent as well. But those are areas. The last thing I'd mention is we're also in the process of doing what some other districts have done, which is starting a staff childcare. I mentioned it during the budget season, and that's an area where we may look to also generate revenue. But there's more that's going to have to be built out throughout this year. So.
Sure, yeah, and I certainly don't mean to re-adjudicate a lot of the budgeting that already has occurred, like, totally get it. I was just trying to see if there's something that comes up of like, well, if we had another 10K, we could generate 50.
Right.
Because we're trying to close a $21,000 gap, like, it's not that big. I guess just in closing, from me, what would be your perspective on splitting the 21K as the rest has been split? So effectively, like, this nets to just the top 6 line items.
Yeah.
Like, I guess just in your perspective, why shouldn't the school split that 54-46 with the town?
I'll just speak for myself on that. I mean, it would be very difficult to do. I don't know, this was presented, Jamie built this out with that in mind as it was laid out. We've certainly sustained a series of cuts over the last 5 years that have kind of brought our budget down and tried to reduce. We came in with our best foot forward to try to put forth a budget that was passed, that had reductions, that we proactively did prior to even the override to try to show good faith within the community. I don't know where I would find those I haven't talked to my body, which is the school committee either, but with regard to that, I don't know where I would find the funds to do that.
Thank you.
And Lucas, I just want to say, I'm glad you brought up the cuts, because I was just going to say, I'm also just not a fan of Model A because of just additional cuts, and just knowing all the work that you did to get your budget down to where it is now. I mean, school, that just, redistricting is like the whole thing, right? It's like, it's so emotional, and you went through the steps to make it happen, and I personally feel like you could use a little breathing room for at least a year before more happens.
5 minutes.
Yeah.
I'll go take it. Yell out the window if you no.
When we close up this discussion, is there any advocates for Model A? Do we need to make a formal recommendation?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
like a, oh, okay, sorry.
One quick,
Yeah.
newbie clarification question. Restoring the third ambulance would presumably have some sort of incremental maintenance cost to that ambulance. That sits outside the scope of the operating budget, correct?
Yes and no. So the ambulance, most of the ambulance and/or if we needed to get repair gear, usually those are capital items. But some of the general maintenance of the apparatus are in the DPW budget. So the DPW basically takes care of all the town fleet. We also do all the school fleet. And so those operating costs for, oil change, just the basic maintenance would come out of a different place. But if we needed to buy a new set of hoses or, computer systems or software, that'll come by the finance committee probably somewhere in like November, December, January for annual capital program.
Gotcha.
So I would entertain a motion to recommend Model V to the town council for approval.
Second to recommend.
First and a second.
First and second,
Phil
great.
and Ken?
And we're here, so all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? And passes. Great. So then we move on to 5-year fiscal forecasts.
All right, so through you, Madam Chair, I'm going to go through some slides, and some of these I'm going to go through quick. A lot of these were actually developed with the idea that they would help the community understand the four corners of the puzzle and the field of play going into next year, okay? So there's going to be some factoids here and some other data sets to help the community conversation about where to go post over the two failed overrides. So I put this all in the packet. I know it's a little hard to see. It's hard to cram the whole control sheet on, but down the bottom here in FY27, when you add up all the numbers and look at the assumptions, you're looking at about a $1.6 million budget deficit. That's not where we want to be. We don't want to see red, but I will say this. Given where we've been the last couple of years, obviously the cuts have worked to reduce that deficit number. Looking out, this is something as we go through the budget process, barring any unforeseen negative circumstances, I said that in 2020 and look what happened. So, this is a manageable number that if we all work together, this is a number that we can manage. But I think it's going to take an amazing amount of unity, collaboration, and spirit. Some of those ideas, and I'm not going to go through, were just placed in the memo. Those are also issues that have been talked about before at this group. Those are also issues we don't need to do. I'm just trying to portray and make sure it's clear to everybody. Times are changing. So we have to deal with a new fiscal reality, and so things are going to change. And the way that we deal with customer service delivery is going to alter. Based on this right here, this is the best 5-year forecast we have been able to present with accurate, solid, definitive numbers since before the pandemic. So that's why, working with you, Madam Chair, we wanted to just go through this a little to allow as families come back into town in summer and we get into the fall, people can really talk about these issues. So what are the assumptions? So, we assumed healthcare accounts at about 14%, which is high, but we're Massachusetts, and that's still a decent target. It still could be higher than 14%. Norfolk pension, we're assuming at about 8%. Local aid, 1%. Assessments that we talked about earlier, 4%. The model in here also assumes a 3.8% increase each year for the school department. So even if you did 3%, for example, and you created a goal of 3%, that deficit of 1.9 would go down, right? If healthcare by the end of this comes in at 10%, or we can create some efficiencies through some of the recommendations, maybe that budget deficit then comes down. Of course, obviously if healthcare blows up and it goes up to 20%, that's not good. But I'm just trying to articulate, these numbers are not 100% calcified in stone as we move forward. And most importantly, this model does represent the actual collective bargaining agreements for the next 3 fiscal years. So that's really good news as well. Obviously, as you can look out in 28, 29, 30, you're looking at a $2.5 million deficit, 3.8. But by the time you're talking in this lifetime and what we're working with in the 2020s, that FY30 seems like 20 years away. So, we can't get too, we can't harp on the $5.5 or $7 million numbers that come in 2030 or 31 yet. That's a very, very long way away. I mean, January is a long way away. So. Just to articulate and put it out there, so if you look at this for account 300, you can see FY26 is up in the corner, so they're at 78.3, and if you do 3% across, the reason why I put this slide up there is to show what the annual appropriation would be here for the schools at 3.8% each year for the next 5 years. This is also our estimated tax levy, okay? So I've put in here the variance. So this school request right here, or even at this isn't their formal request, by the way, so I'm just using this as an assumption through what the numbers are that we've worked with the schools. You look over here in percent of the tax levy, this is not gonna, when you see the other numbers, 85% of the tax levy cannot go to one department, okay? Because when you see the other list of what's a casualty, you're going to realize that this forecast is showing you that the community is going to have incredibly hard decisions to make without everybody working together and trying to do the best for everybody and whatnot. So there's very few and limited options on how to, looking out again 5 years, on how to meet this 3.8% increase each year. And I'm just putting that out there for the schools. I certainly got several phone calls about these. I have to articulate out 3 or 4 years. Even if FY27 is doable and we don't see a lot of cuts, I'm laying out what the next $3 million worth of municipal cuts will be. Now, Ryan, we're into revenue loss. Now we are into regulatory compliance problems with the state and federal government. All of those, by the way, cost a lot more money. It's not cheap to be in regulatory in compliance with the state. You usually have to hire consultants, lawyers, a whole variety of other things to get out of that stuff. I can't emphasize enough how incredibly dire the situation is. So if you just look down, this is not a menu of me proposing anything. I'm not putting this out there in a budget proposal. I'm just articulating for all of you and the public what's at stake. Your reputation as a community is firmly on the line, and there's no other way to put it. If you're the first lending library in the United States of America, and in 3 or 4 years you're closing that building, that is a Boston Globe headline story, and that is not what you want to be in the newspaper for. Your senior center has won statewide awards. We've had the Secretary of Elder Affairs out here numerous times. They compliment us on this. You just look down, you're closing your museum possibly, you're hurting your public works department. These are grounds and snow and ice removal staff, right? So this isn't just nothing. This is people that plow your streets. So, even the elections division, the reason why this is on here is because that's one of the last staff members we hired. A year or so ago when the town clerk, I think, had 4 or 5 elections, we asked her to do a special too, it had a lot of stuff. So we had to do we have to do to support our town clerk. These are not choices we want, but it is articulating for the public. Why? Because if you go through the budget, and all of you know it, but for the newbies, when you go through it, I can't reduce the town clerk staff. I can't get rid of the conservation agent. The Board of Health is a state. We have to have a Board of Health agent. By charter, you have to have at least me. Even if you got rid of everybody else, you still have to have somebody in the town administrator's seat. We're down to the point where a lot of you need a procurement office. We have to, by statute, do procurement. We have to have people pay the bills, accounts payable. We have to have vendor, deal with all the stuff that all of you do in the private sector with the county. So when you work backwards from that, you look at discretionary areas. And we've heard very loud and clear about public safety, so I didn't put that on the list because that's a sensitive issue for good reason. And I didn't add schools on this list, I did that on the slide before. If you're looking at 3.8% in the schools for the next 5 years, and you look at this list and you know there's a deficit, I don't think I need to do the math for anybody. Somewhere, somehow, there's cuts happening if we can't figure out how to manage that deficit this year. So I just put this out there to give the community a heads up of where the next layer of municipal reductions would be. I don't have any more OPEB accounts I can get rid of. I don't have anything else. It's in the bone. The next set of slides are pretty quick. These are ones that we'll email out to everybody. I just put on here, as we're going into the next fiscal year, the percentage of every board and committee and every department and how it relates to the budget. Okay? So if you go through, you can look at a community, you can look at a budget like DPW is less than 4% of your entire appropriation. Grounds, highway, roads, sidewalks, tree trimming, crosswalk painting, snow and ice removal, you go down the list, somehow, some way, I don't know how Brutus does it and his team, but they're able to manage what they still get done with a budget that's less than 4%. So you can see on here, the Council on Aging in the Senior Center is less than not even 1/2% of the entire budget. And we'll go through on the next slide, as all of you know, and I've articulated in my budget documents for years, there's another 15% of municipal costs that are in the municipal budget that actually pay for school grounds, custodians, cleaning supplies, debt, interest. That's this slide. So again, a lot here. I'm not going to go through all of it. But what I'm trying to basically lay out is, over here is the total percentage of each of the municipal departments in which goes towards the school. So you can see on here, there's 21.5 million of municipal costs that go towards public education. That also includes Tri-County and the Aggie school as well. This right here is a history of the requests. The yellow are the final appropriations to account 300. The green right here is what the requests were through those years. This is the tax levy growth. And the purple column over here is the requested percentage of new tax levy. Obviously, when you go back to 2019, the school department was looking for about 92% of the entire tax levy. So I point this out relative to the other slides I just did. There's a lot of competing interests for these funds. As Councilor Frangillo eloquently states, the pie is not big enough. So I do a few asterisks on here, but for a lot of people where this is the first couple of years they've been paying attention to the budget, in 2019, 2024, and 2025, we drained almost all of our rainy day reserves, or we used one-time monies to patch budget gaps. One-time monies, as many of you probably know, just put the town further into deficit, and that was what happened over the last year. We also put a slide together with some comparable population towns, and we put in population of the communities with the operating budget and the school budget. Again, these are not apples and oranges. These are not apples to apples. Every community is going to be different. There's communities where the town of Lexington, for example, they do all the healthcare on behalf of all the school in town. There's other shared services between these departments. Many of these other school districts too have very robust revolving funds and fee schedules. Also, if you just notice, which I hope people really do pay attention to, if you're looking at Natick at 202 million budget, we're at 146. So as we heard all year, if you want to know why the town of Natick has 39 librarians and we have 12, there you go. Okay? If you want to know why they have 89 firefighters and 89 police officers, that's why. If you want to know why they plow their snow down to the asphalt at all hours of the day, that's why. Same thing with the school department. If you look at those budgets versus ours, why are those school services? Why do they have AP? Why do they have foreign language at a much higher rate? Because they have $58 million more in their budget than we do. Look at Needham. 250, our aspirational rate. 250, they have $110 million more in their budget than the town of Franklin does. Okay? That is surreal. When we're the same population, and by the way, I would note, our town geographical size are bigger than both of those communities, by far. So we're plowing more roads, more sidewalks, more this, more that, across the board. This community may still be the best bang for your buck of any tax rate of any community in Eastern Massachusetts. These are some slides I'm going to go through to Ryan's point earlier about revenues. We've been trying to keep our local receipts and our revenues strong. So I put in orange the most recent actual from FY25, which is on the agenda later as well. Almost all of the municipal receipts that have come in are virtually record-breaking numbers, and they are the highest amounts we've ever had. Motor vehicle excise, we don't have a lot to do with, other than the incredible treasurer's office who collects all of the bills and deals with upset customers. Right? But meals tax. You look up here, look at the history of actuals. Pre-pandemic, we were doing okay. Well, the business culture and reputation in this community have stood out. We now bring in almost $100,000, a couple $100,000 more than what we had during the pandemic. People are coming to Franklin to eat out. So the sip and stroll events we have, the harvest festivals we have, the work that Corey Shea does, the work the Downtown Partnership, the 4th of July Committee, all the other events we have, people are coming into Franklin and eating out. Kudos to the shed across the street. Good luck getting a reservation after 5 o'clock. But like, people are coming in not from just from Franklin, but from other communities to pay for this. This is a good reputation. And as I've said many times before, we have more liquor licenses and more restaurants than before the pandemic started, and not every city or town can say that. Same thing here with hotel tax. Record-breaking numbers. Obviously, this past year, we were a little low, but there's a 4th hotel that's come online. We expect those numbers to stay strong, particularly with the World Cup coming here to Foxborough next year for probably a 2 or 3 month window, where we fully expect all the 4 hotels in Franklin will be completely filled for a good duration. Cannabis excise tax, one of the best economic development stories we've had in Franklin. If we didn't have this excise tax, your override wouldn't have been 3.8 million, it would have been 4.4 million. So the money that we're bringing in through sales, because we're the only town in the entire region that essentially, basically, the voter said yes, or the townspeople didn't say they didn't want any stores, we're now putting in $500,000 in revenue into our budget. And then, oh, by the way, on new growth, with all the properties that have been built, all of those properties have been renovated, all of the valuation of those properties. I mean, you're talking about a structural $1 million plus revenue system that has come into the town of Franklin. And sometimes I feel like if nobody even knew it was here, they wouldn't know. Barely an impact or even a registered issue, other than I know some people complain there may be a little bit of a smell out on 140. In the summer months, they stay over near, BJ's or whatever. So, so you get the June, right? So 1 month of exhaust, whatever the process is. And then here's the ambulance receipts. Again, as the chief said, the call volume speaks for itself. The numbers go up because the call volume is going way up as well. And this is the last slide before I do the summary. I thought it was helpful. We do this at the Finance Committee, but here are the fees and permit structural breakdown that the municipal staff contributes to local receipts. So most people don't know this. My office brings in about $125,000 annually in revenue through basic permits, fees, liquor licenses, common victual licenses, used car dealerships, a whole variety of different things, right? Huge kudos to Julie McCann in my office, as well as the town attorney. This is basically 25% of our budget. So when people talk about raises, and I know we've talked about this a lot, some people campaign against this stuff, but we're bringing in the revenue to compensate the employees who are doing the work. So ultimately, there is no impact or very little impact on the tax levy, okay? Because our staff are bringing in the revenues. Even the town clerk's bringing in almost $112,000 a year on a budget where that's about 1/3 of her budget. So all of these fees offset the costs of the staff and the benefits that go along with it. And if you are looking at your rainmaker, it's right here. You're a building commissioner, Gus Brown, at $1.3 million. He brings into this office, into this organization, and he does not have $1.3 million worth of staff downstairs. So, what Gus does in building fees certainly helps out the entire community. In summary, just a snapshot in time, you're looking at a $1.9 million deficit next year. Deficits will slowly grow into the future. Municipal revenues are at record highs. Honestly, I've sucked blood from rocks. I even have a passport office downstairs as a cheap plug. So if your family needs passports, we do photos now as well. So any way to make a nickel, we try it and we do it. We're very successful at it. But I have to be honest, because people ask me all spring, well, why can't we just go get more business, get more revenue? It's like, you know, and now I've lost we're cutting one of the staff members in the planning office. I still have not hired a director yet because we haven't got any qualified applicants for the planning director. And with the deputy town administrator who's done an amazing job on business development over the last couple of years, I'm gonna have a lot less bandwidth as a municipal staff to go do any economic development projects at all, let alone maintain some of the stuff that we've had. School hold harmless is certainly something that this committee and this community has got to get engaged on and has got to start talking about with the school committee and the school department about what to do about this. Happy to talk about options and answer questions. There's a bunch in the memo. And just for expectation management, again, I'm barring any major unforeseen circumstance from the federal or state level, I don't anticipate this 5-year fiscal forecast changing at all well into next year, but certainly not until January or February when the governor releases her budget. And then for folks that get this later, we just always put a bunch of links at the end. People ask me all the time, do you do audits? Yep, we have a whole archive there. We have our bond ratings, we have all the materials. So for the newbies, there's plenty of reading material for all of you to go to and check out. So thank you for the opportunity. Happy to answer any questions, and the department heads I think are here if anybody has any questions on their budget. Just so we're clear, there's no action needed from anything on this. This was just us putting it out for the community to understand where we're going. Thanks.
Thank you. And before everyone just asks questions, I just wanted to comment that I feel like some people will look and be like, 1.9 million, that's not so bad. But it's like on a set, like we're doing decreases on a SAD budget to start with. So it's like, we're just carrying over SAD. So like, that's just something to think about as people look at that number. That's just to maintain what we had to do, which was like really cut and, you know, just something to consider. So really the number should be higher.
Or you could take that 2 million or so and go to this chart or that chart and pick what you want to cut.
Yeah.
Right, to your point now. So it's right all there for people to certainly marinate on.
But yeah, go for it.
So I have just in general, thank you, that was interesting. And I know you laid out a bunch of potential ideas of where we could go and, you know, whether we could consolidate benefits under one roof or, you know, I know you had some other ideas. And I, because I'm a dork, I started researching what other places have done at other times. And I stumbled across an EY study for this city of Milwaukee.
Okay.
It was fascinating. I'm a dork, but they spent, EY came in and they did a full deep dive so that Milwaukee didn't become the next Detroit and have to declare bankruptcy and just turn to rubble because they had to get rid of so much fire and police and public safety, never mind the schools. And so they brought EY in and they did this big study and they had fascinating results where there was no smoking gun. It was a bunch of little things. I made notes. They looked at all town-owned property, what could be leased out as office space, what could be sold, stuff like that. Things that might not get a lot of love and attention now. Could those be shifted to revenue generating office space, rental income type properties? Could they have some shared town services? Like I know we do with the animal control, right? We pay Bellingham and they talked about street sweeping and leaf collection services and all kinds of other sort of smaller DPWs type functions, sharing those services throughout some other local towns just to get economies of scale and savings. They talked about monetizing city assets, like putting advertising on bus benches and trash bins and stuff like that, where other people, other businesses in town might want to advertise, you know, the Rome on your park bench. These things all added up to significant income and or savings over the course of years. And so my point is, not that we need to do any of these, but is there a world in which we have a council made of, you know, maybe citizens and or people that have ideas that can be vetted? I know you said your staff is limited in what they can do. You know, I don't know if that council will be successful. I have no idea. But is there a world in which people like me that just did some research, that you've probably done some of this already, I don't even know, where we exchange ideas. There's technology and innovation. I know at my company, we always say, just because we're growing doesn't mean we hire people. Are there processes we can improve? Is there technology that would take away the need to hire a person? You know, is there, I know we already have a joint budget subcommittee, but that's kind of focused on the budget. Is there a way in which we bring people together to have these ideas and exchange them and vet them? You know, it was just a suggestion.
Well, if that's what the dork brings, bring more. Because that was great, Lauren, and I think those are I think what you mentioned are some ideas, or certainly I think people would get wary about certain things, but I think what you're bringing up are, when you get to this point, you got to look at uncomfortable ideas like monetizing city assets, right? The banners uptown, you know, for example, you know, some towns put advertisements in the end of those, right? There's a revenue stream, and sometimes there's restrictions on what you can use it for, but I think the Joint Budget Subcommittee's got to air out a list of these things. I don't want to answer all of them, because I want what you did, I think, through the fall or the winter, whatever it is, maybe even multi-year. You know, the community's going to have some uncomfortable conversations about some of the realities that maybe some of these things have to happen even though we don't want them to. Or maybe our community is going to change a little bit even though we don't want to go in that direction because of whatever the dynamics were around the budget situation. So at some point, maybe the Joint Budget Subcommittee has a workshop and these ideas can get poured out. I'm not so sure we need to have the sticky paper on the walls and stuff like that, but if need be, fine. And if people come forward with 50 ideas, you know, we can respond to whether we can do those ideas or whether the community wants to do those ideas. I think it's an excellent idea, and I think it's probably something that's going to take place. If you were to do that, we'd want to do that sometime early in the next calendar year. Because, as you know, March is right around the corner.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you know, what the budget, what you put forth just highlights that if we're a town that doesn't want an override, you know, if we're never going to be successful with it, unfortunately, we have to think about these things.
Right.
So we can't have both. You can't have everything you want and not want to pay for it.
That's right.
So we're at that point where uncomfortable conversations will have to be had, and whether we like it or not.
That's right.
Maybe this is a conversation to be tabled, but what is the scope of the benefit we're currently getting on hold harmless? Is it compared to if we didn't have that designation? Like what's kind of the amount that we're talking about in case they change that formula?
Last time I knew, I think it's about 12 or 13 million. So it's the second highest hold harmless community in the state after the city of Boston, which is probably up at 40 or 50 million. And I've joked many times before, Mayor Wu is one of our best friends here because if hold harmless is a part of any formula change, you can assure Mayor Wu will be first in line right outside and I will be walking right next to her, right? Use her as the paving the way, right? Because in all seriousness, the Boston lawmakers are totally going to listen to her and the legislature is going to listen to her. I will just say this last thing, John. You're in the order of 12 or 13 million. The likelihood that they gouge that right away is highly unlikely. But this has been a dynamic the town's known about for 20 years. So this is not something new. The school committee's known about this since the deficit start, or since the declining enrollment in 2008 or 9. So if you're a lawmaker in another district that's seeing a huge enrollment spike, like a Hopkinton or a Needham, you know where the hold harmless communities are. So you're saying, wait a minute, you guys haven't raised your net school spending enough. Why is my town not getting enough money to cover aid? By the way, Franklin was probably the highest was one of the most richest Chapter 70 communities in the 90s and early 2000s. Because of the way the formula was, the land values here were really low, but it was building like crazy in the 90s. So they saw a huge spike in children in the 90s and early 2000s. So the town got a ton of local aid at that time. As our wealth has gone way up and as our enrollment has decreased, it's kind of created a perfect storm that's been in existence for probably about 10 or 15 years. So My guess is if the legislature really did go after that, and Boston and many of other communities that are seeing significant enrollment declines, because it's kind of all around the state, hopefully they'd try to work something out where they weed you off of it over 10 or 15 years. So I doubt it would be one plunk at once. But also, they're doing this at a time where the federal spending is going to evaporate, and that pressure is going to fall on states. There's no way states are going to be able to fund all this. So at the end of the day, we're just going to have to really get rid of a lot of stuff in the state budget. And so that's something where I'm very worried because, it's like, I think we're going to see a lot of reforms too on healthcare. Maybe necessary too, some of them, but there's going to be a lot of reforms. So it's certainly something to be very, very concerned about. But it's about 12 to 13 million.
Thank you.
Thanks for putting this together. I think it's a good look ahead and to do it now after an override failed, and now we're starting the discussion maybe early on like what it looks like. I did have a question on some of our school grounds that are, I guess, hopefully are now consolidated, maybe not in use. I think Davis Thayer's been not in use for a while. Did anything you had in here assume any sale of those, either for the purpose of income generation or for the purpose of just reduced maintenance on, that's a huge piece of property to take care of?
So this is another excellent question. So when you sell, by state law, when you sell a piece of property that's municipally owned, you cannot use it for any other purpose but land acquisition in the future. So if we sold a Davis Thayer parcel, not a dime of that could be used to actually offset any of this budget. What would be saved is we spend about 100 changes, but about 150 to about 200,000 a year in general water, electricity, basic heat, insurance, all of that for the Davis Thayer property. So you would see a reduction of a couple $100,000 off the budget if just to use that as an example, if that property was sold. Same thing with any other municipal property. If we owned, which we've done analyses on what we've owned before, we don't actually own much land that would be available to be sold. Very little, as a matter of fact. But even if we owned a piece of neighborhood parcel that came to us through a planning board decision from a wetland or something like that, even if we sold that lot for 50 grand, we'd have to put it in a special revenue account and then use it for an offsetting purpose. So there's very, very limited uses that any of the town-owned property could have in terms of helping them.
Is that true for any financial gain you make from that money as well?
Yep.
So interest.
Sits in an interest and escrow account. It sits in what's technically called a special revenue account.
But there would still be at the moment, and we'll just continue on Davis Thayer. I don't mean to pick on Davis Thayer, but it does kind of seem like a community landmark we're just holding on to as a community landmark that's costing a good amount. Right? If you were to sell a parcel like that, sure, you bank the money to only be able to buy another parcel in the future, but you've now trimmed 200,000 or so recurring from your budget, and you didn't lose that money, right? You still have that money to go, theoretically buy Davis Thayer back in 20 years when the population changes and you need it again. It's not like it has a loss, it's just $200,000 a year savings.
Some people in the audience will remember this. The council, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, sold what was formerly known as the Franklin Sewer Beds, which is off Pond Street behind the Starbucks where Brookview Condominiums is. Right as you go around that corner, there's some condominiums that go down. That land was sold for, I think, $1.5 million, put in a special revenue account. And then when a big piece of open space came up 7 years later, we used that money to buy the piece of open space. So you're exactly right? Any for sale property would go in a special revenue account and likely would go to offset the cost of the capital needs at Remington Jefferson, the new roof at Horace Mann, possibly the police station, or anything else that was in that sphere that we needed. Those would offset a lot of other costs. You're absolutely right. In addition to the operating.
An unrelated question. Have we done anything with Norwood? Because from your comparable chart, they seem like they've nailed this. The rest of us seem like we should just be looking at Norwood.
We tried. In 2018-19, they had never had an override pass. Overrides aren't what they do. They sponsored a group called One Norwood. Sound familiar? And they went out in 2019 and got a $6.5 million override pass.
Okay, so they just did an override.
Yep.
Makes sense.
And I just asked about, you know, on
There are.
I'll just.
I told you you had good instincts.
Never
I
mind.
told you you did on the phone. It's like, and Norwood, is there something like with us in
Looking at
that?
it, they were like the one that has less makes more, and
Just following up on the Dave's Fair example, just for a quick second. So what if we didn't sell it, but we leased it out to some place that paid us rent? That would go into the operating budget as revenue?
I'd have to check with the town attorney on that. It possibly could. I think there is a way to do that. However, I got to clause any excitement because there's no ADA compatibility in that building.
Oh, I'm
So it's like-
using a bad example. You know, I was just trying to,
Yeah.
you know, just trying to play on the same example where it's sitting there idle. Is there any way it could generate revenue, whether it would be from leasing it out to somebody who wanted to use it for a, you know, the winter art exhibit, you know?
It was not a school that was fit for children. It was not a school or building that is fit for anybody.
does that feel?
There's a massive insurance liability on the town. I mean, plus just to pause really also quickly, like there was a whole reuse committee that went through a process to come up with a recommendation. And the reason why somebody, oh.
But what happened? How are you gonna make money off of it? You sell it to a private entity who then builds on it and pays taxes.
Right.
That's how you make
That's how
money
you
off
make the
of
money.
it, correct?
But selling it sounds easy, and to some it is, but for others it isn't. So unfortunately, when I worked in Hopkinton, the center school is still sitting there. They closed it 14 years ago, and the reason why it still sits there is because it's too much to improve, right? It's a $40 million upgrade for a private, and somebody's going to want to build 4 or 5 story condos. Probably not popular in town right now. And so you're stuck in a little bit of a rut where the police station issue is still out there. We're going to have a pretty in-depth meeting on the siting of the police station in a few weeks. There's open houses through the fall. There's still a contingent of people in Franklin who want the police station to possibly be at the Davis Thayer School. So we're working through the police station process and the Parmenter parcel. And then at some point I would anticipate in 2026, and I agree with all of you, at some point a decision needs to get made one way or the other. Because we cannot just hang on to all this property forever. Could not agree with you guys more. But for community representatives, either that are elected or appointed under the boards, I'm just giving you the 20-year history. You know, some of this stuff comes with a lot of passion. For example, maybe we could build housing within the current building and keep the facade, and it would keep that character of downtown. Some people have that view, that's fine. Some people bowl it over, knock it over, sell it to the highest bidder. That's fine too. You also have to be careful that the highest bidder becomes, an entity that doesn't have to pay property taxes. So against the police chief, even if you sell it and you sell it to somebody, that doesn't mean you're going to bring in property taxes with it, because you may be with a nonprofit entity that doesn't have to pay property taxes. So the vision, I think, has gone through a lot of process. I do think in the next couple of years, hopefully a decision's made, because I think the community has to move on for many reasons. But
I mean, it does seem like I think that's a pretty valid financial point, right? Like you sell it, you put something there that will generate tax income.
Right.
I mean, if that is condos, I get that there's an aversion to condos, but you start to solve multiple problems together, right? Because now you have more students in the school, and like the whole homeless thing, or harmless thing goes kind of less in the mind, because now you have more students. Like there's a bit of like, we could not do that and not have a library, or do something like that and have a library. Like it's not like the decision is becoming A and B, not like A through Z, as you kind of mentioned. It's not like really that
you're spot on.
complicated.
You're spot on that. That's exactly right.
Sorry,
But you can't not grow and not raise. You want to know why those towns up there have those big budgets? Because they go to the polls and they pay for it.
Right,
Simple as that.
just to illustrate.
But you're exactly
Go to that
right.
comparison slide, please.
What? This one? The
Yeah.
other town?
Yeah, I wanted I don't know how much of a question I have here, it's more of a statement. You know, I looked at it first, and I looked at that column, school percentage of operating budget, Franklin's the highest, and it's kind of like, oh, well, wow, are we really, really doing so much for the schools? You know, when you look at the actual numbers, the school budget isn't, you know, that matters a little bit less than the operating budget that's next to it. When you see what that looks like relative to all of our peers, that's a real challenge we have. It just speaks to, you know, I mention that because I think people can get caught up on the percentage of operating budget on this slide, where the true challenge that we're faced with is how little we have, how little space we have in our operating budget. So we need to find other ways to generate revenue as a town. There are only so many ways a town can raise money. One is taxing, one is building, one is receipts. You know, when things are not going on one of the others, we have to shift it to the other. And that's a conversation that the town more broadly needs to have. We need to, you know, we do need a strategic plan. And I know that there are groups that you know, there are discussions that continue happening. Too many of our discussions, I believe, happen on Facebook or online. More of them need to be happening in forums where people are actually attending. It's you know how I feel about all of that. But I just wanted to say, I do appreciate the slide. I just think it's very important to understand it, and it's very easy to misunderstand it when you're looking at the percentage, you know, the percentage of operating budget as opposed to what it's truly telling us that we need more revenue as a town. However that happens, you know, there are a number of differing opinions about how we actually drive said revenue. You know, if it's condos, if it's selling to someone, selling properties or whatnot. But we have to make a decision. My guess is it's going to be some combination of these things. And frankly, if we don't do that in combination at some point with increasing revenue from people who are already in town, we'll start to lose, and we're going to get to a place where we really can't do that. If we haven't already done that.
Yeah. Great.
Yes. Is there an option for people to voluntarily pay more in property taxes to go towards a fund for, I don't know how we would even create it, but I feel like the prevailing argument that I heard during the override discussions from the yes, people that intended on voting yes, was that they were more than willing, happy, would love to pay more in taxes. So I wonder, in order to get these services, not just because they're insane and love taxes, but because they, you know, they saw the value in it.
Yeah.
So all of those people that said they would love to pay more in taxes, is there a way for them to voluntarily write in on their tax form that they want to, you know, for that extra money, and that extra money could go to a fund?
Quick answer is no. So you need we would need to get a special act filed by the council. Jeff Roy files a bill on our behalf. We're the loan sponsor of it, and it'll go nowhere only because you hit a wall with a committee, because then other people are going to say, well, if they're doing it, why don't we do it? And then it becomes a statewide more conversation. I'm having a struggle getting the legislature to put out a bill allowing us to increase our hotel local option tax by 2% more. It's not paid for by you guys. It's just paid for by the people who are coming here from the World Cup. I can't get them to even let us vote on that. I guarantee you the council would vote that hotel 2% in a second if that was law. It's been filed for legislation for 2 years, 3 years now, whatever it is, and it still can't seem to get out. And I've made the argument that you should really be doing this right before all of these towns and Boston host millions of people next summer, allow towns to get in on that. But you cannot put anywhere like a checkbox on a property tax bill and say, I check my box, I wish to pay 2% more. You absolutely can't do that. and it would face immense hurdles, if not be in the black hole of the legislature really quick because of how taxation is done. It took them 30-something years to find a way to do that graduated tax, the millionaire's tax. Literally, it took them 30 years to figure out how to do that because of the state constitution. So it probably run into some constitutionality issues. People ask me the same thing all the time. Somebody came in to visit us last week who was really nice gentleman, about seeing if like seniors could just get like a huge cut based on age. You can't do any of those things. It's very, very limited in what we can do locally. All of these issues are completely controlled by the state and by the legislature and the governor, and they're very, very hard to do.
It just seems very ridiculous to not take up people's voluntary, just choosing, volunteering to give you money. Which is what people
Well, you could make a gift.
doing. Okay,
Somebody could say, here's $100,000,
okay.
and say this goes towards the purpose of this.
Even if it didn't go to, even if it went to even if you couldn't say it goes towards a specific thing.
You make it specifically towards a part. You could do either,
Okay.
you could say, I donate $100,000 to the Franklin Public Schools.
So
And you can leave it up to the superintendent on how to decide, in the school committee on how to spend that. Or you could say, I wish to spend, here's a check for $100,000 to fund Franklin Public School arts programs. So it could be more specific.
Okay.
Somebody also could make a gift and say, I want to pay for that specific teacher.
Okay.
I mean, it
So
could be a
that's
whole
distinction
myriad of
without
ways.
That's a distinction without a difference, right? So what I'm getting at
Yeah.
is there, I used the property taxes example only because people were very willing and happy to pay more in property taxes. But the bottom line is they were willing to pay more. They were happy to contribute more, and the people that were clamoring to pay more, we should be taking those people up on that offer in any way that we can. If they really want to put their money where their typewriter is and pay more, then we should give them that option.
Well, then we can go back and tell them they can write a check. Because there's no way for us to charge them more property taxes.
Right.
So all that stuff's just, we can't do that. But if they want to write a check, make a donation to the library or the schools or this, that, or the other thing, people are more than free and willing to do that. Other than that, I'm being very sincere about this. Those people that want to pay more taxes should work harder to get the community unified behind the question that was just failed, right? So, I mean, that's actually really what needs to happen. If those people that want to be charitable, that's wonderful. If they voted to increase taxes, that's tremendous. But there are very, very few options. Community Preservation Act, which we voted on 22, is a rare example of a local option where you can raise money for specific purposes. But those are very, very far and few between in state law, and so people can certainly make donations. $500, $500, whatever people. And the council every 2 weeks, I think the school committee probably does too. Every 2 weeks, we accept all of the donations publicly. So people are very charitable. They donate $1,000 to the fire department or the library or the scene. So people do that stuff pretty frequently. I mean, we do have a fair amount of gifts that people give us. Corporations do the same thing. Banks do the same thing.
They're getting a tax rate.
But I
They
think
are.
the challenge there too is it becomes unpredictable and it's hard to model and it's hard to rely on. And you have all these feelings after the field override and yeah. And then all of a sudden they get an influx of, I'll make up a number, $1 million because people went all in. Now next year it's down to 5. So you're just you're hiding the problem a little bit. I totally agree. It checks you could do it, but I think it's challenging to have these basically unreliable income lines.
Streams. Well, and then you'd add to the unreliable income streams. It's also, I worry that creates separate classes of citizens because,
I'm a giver, you're not.
Right, I'm a giver, you're not, so.
But we already have that.
So I can, sure.
We already have that.
Sure,
Let's be
but
clear.
you don't need to create another one, so I can use this service for, because I'm putting into the service and others are not. And that's something you want to try to avoid.
I don't think that's a realistic
You have
criticism
to.
because how could I go okay, so we don't want people's money.
No.
Just- I'm not
But
understanding.
I'm just saying that the suggestion about how to get their money
Yeah.
in terms of If somebody wants to donate to the libraries, the schools, they should write a check. They can, charitable donations are great, like there's a tax deductible, you should absolutely do that. But if you're talking about just having someone pay voluntary incremental real estate tax, they're doing it, and many of the advocates who wanted that are doing it because as a community, you can actually do more for said community. So if you're raising it from just a subset, then that subset is looking for it for that subset.
Right.
That's the risk you run into if you say some can, but not everybody puts into the pot.
Through you, Madam Chair, if it's not sustainable, so even if somebody gave a check, if all those folks, Shannon, said, we're gonna give you the $90,000 to pay for the 2 ambulance, for the 2 paramedics, right? Great. Well, what are we gonna do next year?
Right.
Are they gonna donate 90 grand every year? And then when that's a full year, that's almost 190,000, are they gonna donate that? So I think what they're trying to get at is it's not really sustainable because you're plugging the budget with one-time monies that then are gonna fall off when the donations fall off. And this dynamic will be coming up on Wednesday revolving around the senior center LPN, right? That person was almost laid off last year, was laid off this year, was clearly part of the budget cuts. A gentleman who was upset about that cut wrote a check for her salary for the whole year. They're gonna discuss it on Wednesday night, whether to accept it or not. I think a lot of the bullet points all of you brought up are gonna be there. And I met with the individuals and said, even if this gets accepted, this person has a job for this year, but then next year that revenue source isn't there, so it's not sustainable. Again, if people want to be charitable, we have gift accounts in almost every department that people do give to. We accept those, and then the department heads work on how to spend those. So that is a certainly viable option.
Any other considerations on the 5-year forecast? Good?
Yep.
In which case, our next agenda item is the standing updates, just I don't know, they're probably in the package here, right? The stabilization account report, local receipts.
Yes.
I'm gonna guess the
Yep.
summary.
Yep. So it's Carrie's just as usually just for the newbies, we usually on a quarterly basis do year-to-dates, we do revenue projections, we give updates, quarterly on revenues. I think you might have asked for this, Madam Chair, at one point. Maybe Sue Dusnap asked for this, I think, at one point. To have the stabilization accounts. Just for what is a stabilization account? It's basically a savings account. We do earn interest off these, so we've actually made a lot of money recently because most of these are in high yield savings accounts. So we've been getting 3.75%, 4.25%, 5% returns on these. So we actually have grown these accounts pretty well. And these are for very specific purposes. We cannot get rid of these. We cannot transfer money out of them. They are legally and statutory binding to whatever the purpose is. Most of these have been set up for many, many years, but they're to offset costs. Like the athletic fields is a savings account when we have to repair some of the athletic fields, fire trucks, property acquisition, a few others. Happy to answer any questions on any of them, but.
On the stabilization accounts or also on the local receipts?
Either or. I mean, stabilization now, I guess.
No questions on that one. Anybody? Stabilization?
And then we're just giving a year-to-end date on 6/30/25 of all the revenues that came in through local receipts. So I just showed you some up on the screen, but what you really want to look to is the bottom half, by the way. Water, sewer, stormwater, solid waste. Those are all enterprise funds. We'll get into those some other day for new folks, but those are separate accounts that are off budget by statute. Really, you want to look at the general funds revenues up at the top, and you'll see, we've budgeted pretty closely. We collected about 116% of what we anticipated, which is good news. Just to make sure I'm clear about something, we raised the local receipt assumption in the FY26 budget by well over $1 million. So even though you saw the budget was one number and it looks like it was a big return, that is true. But for this year, we have to go watch those revenues very, very closely in case there's any economic disruption. But that's the year end.
Did the surplus on the general fund, does that go towards, like, okay, am I reading this right? The budget was 13.6 and we collected 15.7?
Yep.
So the surplus on that essentially falls to the bottom, right? Because we had a balanced budget,
Free cash.
and then it goes to free cash. Have we done all that process yet? And then CapEx? I just forget this.
No, free cash will be certified probably by the end of October.
Right.
So there's a whole state mandated process that we go through, so we'll probably have that number probably the end of October.
Okay. Any other questions on that?
And then the last one is just a breakdown of the, through the end of the fiscal year, breakdown of the municipal fees and permits. If you look on the sheet before, we say fees, but we don't break out by department on licenses or permits. And so we just broke it down by department and where the areas were of where we were bringing the revenue. Just because it's interesting stuff, I guess. See, Lauren, I'm a dork too. I like to.
And then the future agenda items are the next meeting dates, which is great, and then deep dive in technology, which I know we deferred, which is now great, smart, knowing we got ahead of us. And then member comments, I actually did want to comment today. It seems based on, there was so much good dialogue today, by the way, so great job by our new members and existing members on diving into some of these things. I thought it was really good. It seems like we have some common goals of just figuring this out. I guess I'm a little stumped on figuring out how to create action items, and I don't know if it's a call to the town council of, hey, when do we get it, like, can we create a timeline for Davis there? Can we create a timeline for creating this committee to talk about ideas? Because I want, it'll come quickly, and we're gonna be at that 1.9 problem again pretty quickly, and it's really bigger than a 1.9 problem. So I'd love just to have some clarity on clear timelines of deadlines. I'm a deadline person of when the next step is going to happen. And I don't know who creates those, but I think it would just be great to have.
Sure.
I guess can I just add,
Yeah.
are we gonna consider an override vote again, and what timeline?
It's certainly not my call, but probably, I think, obviously this is all very preliminary. I think it's to try to make sure the community understands that while that vote's there and it's in the rearview mirror, we're still not out of the woods yet. But, I think because there's an election in November and there'll be a resettling of stuff after that. I will say to your point, Natalie, and I think Ken, you mentioned it earlier, I do think there are, this is after all the master plan and open space plan and redistricting. I think a strategic planning effort is worthy. We've got a lot of plans out there. We've got a lot of ideas. I think the community really has to focus in on a couple things that they want to get done. And by strategic planning effort too, I don't mean an omnibus, comprehensive, exhaustive thing. I'm talking about like a $10,000 or $15,000 consultant, third party to come in with the council, the school committee, the FinCom, joint budget, whatever it may be, and work through what are y'all trying to get done and when. I think is exactly your point. It's kind of like a Project 2030, right? Like, where do you want to be at the end of the decade? Is probably something that I think is worthwhile. I think it's kind of to Lauren's point earlier too about the analysis, financial analysis. So we'll probably propose that later on this fall through the capital program and just take a small amount of money, get a ex-town manager, ex-superintendent. They work in consulting firms now. They can come in, work with the community on a month-long basis or so, and really try to hone in on focusing on what are the key 3 or 4 or 5 objectives we need to get done by the end of the decade. So there's going to be a lot of ideas that get left on the side, and that's just part of the process.
Any other final comments from anybody? Great, then I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Nope. Good. Thanks. Good night, everybody. I don't have to tell them, do I?